like to start with a few slides on why would we look at zero trust as a security mechanism. So initially, what we want to look at is why would we go zero trust? What does it mean for us? So initially, what we're saying is zero trust as a mechanism is a different outlook on security. So historically, we've always been able to kind of shut the door around our perimeter. We've been able to say anything on our premises is protected, and we can no longer kind of look at things that way. We can no longer believe users are who they say they are. So because we haven't got physical line of sight at people, they're not always coming into the office. We don't know, that login with that username and password is who we think it is. So we can take a stronger response to that. We don't always know which endpoints people are using. We're opening things up to people a little bit more, and we're allowing people to use their own devices to log in from kind of any place, anywhere. We need to take extra controls to facilitate that. And we're not hosting our own data anymore. So when we're pushing things into the cloud, when we're trying to be more flexible, we're reducing our own kind of infrastructure costs internally. But there's a knock-on effect to that, which we need to consider. And all of that kind of leads into security. So just looking at the kind of principles of zero trust. First of all, what we're doing is we're kind of taking away implicit trust. And we're saying that we're going to assume breach. So whenever somebody tries to access one of our resources, we're going to assume that they're not a trustworthy character. So from that perspective, we need to verify explicitly whenever we've got sight of risk that we need to verify they are who they say they are. And there's multiple data signals we can use to do that. So we start with things like user identity, and we can verify people are who they say they are using tools within the set that we've got. We can look at their location and where they're coming from. We can look at the device that they're using and how healthy that is. And then we can use other things within the workloads, and we can start to classify our data, look at anomalies from what we'd expect access to look like, and we can take action based on all of those things. We also then try to move to a model of least privileged access. So kind of using the ability to limit people's access to elevated roles, to make sure that they're only accessing what they need to access when they need to access it, and providing a kind of holistic picture around that into how we can manage people's access to our resources and keep ourselves protected. If we go into a couple of these elements in a little bit more detail, we can start with identity. So what we want to do is we want to protect people's identity. We want to be able to verify people are who they say they are. So when we're talking about zero trust, what we're saying is just because you've logged in before doesn't mean that your login is still valid to access the same data. So we look at each individual login to try and get to pieces of our data or our resources, and we look for clues that maybe that trust that we've got has changed. So we can then verify people with strong authentication. So we look at things like multi-factor authentication, where people can use applications or text messages or something else that they would possess to verify that they are responsible for the login that they're coming to. We verify that their access is compliant. So we look at the device they're using in real time when they're trying to access our resources. And we look at things such as location. So if they've logged in one place and then an hour later they've logged in somewhere which it's unrealistic to travel to, we can also use those kind of cues to make sure that we're consistently verifying that that user is able to access the data, and that they've kind of passed our risk analysis checks to get to where they need to be. We can look at devices as a whole. So regardless of where people are, we trust that they're always using some kind of device to access our data, which we have authorized. So this includes both corporate and personal devices. So a lot of people now will use their own mobile phones, and they'll have that wherever they go. So increasing the flexibility of accessing what we're allowing people to do means that, they can access that from wherever they are. But that comes with an inherent risk. So they're using their own devices. We perhaps don't have the same level of control over these things. So what we look at here is a range of security policies that we can enforce through the cloud, so that anything with an internet connection, we can keep control over both our data and what that device is doing with our data. We can make sure that it's got sufficient levels of protection, that the configuration of the device is relevant, we can just protect applications if we need to, so that we can protect our data without having to put a high level of security on a user's own device. But should anything happen to that device, we can then take away access to our data and keep ourselves protected at a corporate level. We can also make sure that we're provisioning and updating applications, so we can make sure people are using particular versions of operating systems and applications, particularly on mobile devices, to make sure that there are no inherent security vulnerabilities that we're leaving open. And if we do notice anything within those devices, we can block access, we can remove data from the devices as long as we've implemented the policies correctly to make sure we've got relevant levels of control over those things. So what we can do with that then is we can link that into login scripts, so we can make sure that when people are logging into access resources, they're doing so from a trusted device that we can stand behind and say that we've taken all reasonable steps to ensure that there's not a breach occurring as part of that access. We can also do things from an application level. So we can get the full benefit of Zero Trust by looking at things within the security stack that monitors behavior within applications, particularly within cloud applications. So what we do know is that in a lot of instances, there's going to be applications in use across organizations that potentially we're not aware of. So from an IT perspective, people could be using alternative file share methods. There could be potential for data to be leaking out of these areas, or they could be logging into cloud applications that we're not aware of using their corporate credentials, which is then leaking those credentials and potentially giving access back into our systems. So we can do things to highlight those kind of shadow ITs. We can ensure we're giving people permissions to use the right apps at the right times, and we can limit access based on our experience. So this is all part of kind of an overriding monitoring stance that we can take, where we're looking at, again, the identity, the device and the applications, and across all of those things, we are taking the relevant controls to make sure that our data is protected.